Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into, well, a profoundly complex and sensitive historical event. The Tiananmen Square Protests of 1989.
And for this exploration, we're working just with the stack of source material you've provided that includes a detailed timeline, a list of key figures, and excerpts from a pretty comprehensive Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, so our mission here is really to act as your guides, pulling out only the most important bits of knowledge directly from these sources. We'll walk through the event's origins, trace how things escalated,
Look at how it was suppressed, understand the roles of the main individuals mentioned in the material, and, examine the consequences, both immediate and long-term.
exactly, all based strictly on what's right here in this material we have.
Think of it like getting the essential understanding of this crucial period, drawn specifically and solely from the accounts and info inside these particular sources.
Okay, let's unpack the background then. Starting with the political climate our sources describe in the mid-1980s. They mention Gorbachev's perestroika kicking off in the Soviet Union in '85, which kind of inspired democratization ideas elsewhere.
Right, and in China specifically, the general secretary at the time, Hu Yaobang, tried to revive the whole 100 Flowers campaign idea in May '86, pushing for more free speech.
The sources paint him as, well, widely seen as a reformer, an enlightened leader that naturally raised hopes for change, you'd think.
But that vision, as the sources show, immediately put him on a collision course with conservatives in the party. By September '86, those political reforms shelved.
And a more hardline approach came in with this resolution on spiritual civilization. The sources tell us this put Hu Yaobang under serious pressure from party elders.
And this tension wasn't just behind closed doors. By December '86, student protests started popping up. Beijing, other cities.
The sources note this just intensified that conflict, right, between the reformers and the conservatives.
Absolutely. And the material stakes, this whole thing culminated in Hu Yaobang being forced to resign. That was January 16th, 1987, pushed out by the elders and conservatives.
Zhao Ziyang, who the sources call a moderate reformer, he was premier, then he stepped in as acting general secretary right after January '87, then got formally elected later that year.
And layered on top of all this political maneuvering, you had economic changes adding more tension.
Yes. The sources point to Deng Xiaoping's decision, summer of '88, to start phasing out the fixed price system.
Which led to price hikes and, crucially, it seems to have shifted economic leadership more towards conservatives, like Premier Li Peng. It really highlighted those different camps within the leadership.
So that's the scene, these simmering political tensions, economic shifts described in the sources. What specific event then, according to the material, really lit the fuse for the big protests?
The sources point right to April 15th, 1989. Hu Yaobang passed away. It was just a week after he'd had a heart attack during a Politburo meeting.
Right, his death. Our sources are explicit. This was the direct catalyst. Students remembered him as, a reformer.
So they immediately started mourning gatherings the very next day, April 6th.
And as the sources describe it, these gatherings quickly became more than just mourning.
Yeah, they rapidly folded in demands for democracy, calls to reverse the decisions that had led to his political downfall.
And that's where we see the really rapid escalation, right, as it's detailed here.
Absolutely. By April 18th, the numbers were way up. About 10,000 students, the sources say, from different Beijing universities marched, started a sit-in in Tiananmen Square.
They were clearly linking their grief to demands for democracy.
And the sources also mention a separate group clashing with guards near the party headquarters, Xinhuamen Gate.
The official reaction, as it's presented here, started almost right away. Beijing Daily criticized the protests on April 19th.
But the movement's scale just exploded. Maybe even because of that official reaction, who knows? By the night of April 21st, you had over 100,000 students and citizens in the square.
And the sources stressed this wasn't just Beijing. It spread nationwide through April.
Yeah, reports of rioting, arson in Xi'an, clashes in Wuhan by April 22nd.
And leadership reacts quickly at this point, the sources show. Protesters specifically asked to meet Premier Li Peng on April 22nd.
And significantly, that same day, the material says the 8 elders, including Deng Xiaoping, they met. They viewed the protests as turmoil.
And reportedly agreed on the need for, a forceful response.
This is where that critical split in the leadership, which the sources highlight again and again, really comes into focus.
Right. Zhao Ziyang, before he left for a trip to North Korea, it was pre-planned. He left specific instructions with Li Peng.
The sources detail his approach. End the protests, get students back to class, handle violence strictly, But, and this is crucial, engage in dialogue with students, other groups.
But our sources indicate that while Zhao was gone, the hardline side gained ground. Li Peng, Li Ximing, the Beijing party secretary, and Chen Jiatong, the mayor.
They reportedly sent exaggerated reports about what was happening to Deng Xiaoping. That was April 25th.
And based on Deng's reaction to those reports, CCTV broadcast official commentary that day, which then led to that huge moment, the April 26th editorial in the People's Daily.
Let's pause on that editorial for a second, because the sources describe it as a major turning point. It really inflamed things.
It framed the student activities not as patriotic, but as orchestrated turmoil by a small group with ulterior motives.
Yeah, it explicitly accused them of trying to create chaos, attack leaders, violate the Constitution by opposing the CCP's leadership and socialism.
This editorial, according to the sources, just deeply angered the students, and it really drew that sharp line between reformers like Zhao Ziyang and conservatives like Li Peng.
The sources also bring in that Shanghai incident around the same time, the World Economic Herald magazine.
Right, published stuff Morning Who, criticizing his dismissal. Jiang Zemin, Shanghai party secretary then, ordered it censored.
Editor refused, magazine got suspended. And this incident, plus how Jiang handled it and the reaction to the editorial, the sources note this boosted Jiang's standing with the conservatives, kind of positioned him for later.
Then came that government attempt at dialogue, April 29th. Yuan Mu, state council spokesman, and He Dongcheng, vice minister of education, met student reps.
But the sources state Yuan Mu just defended the April 26 editorial, denied censorship, even with the Herald thing happening, claimed the protests were manipulated.
And this meeting was televised.
It was, and the sources say its content, its tone just prompted students to escalate their protests, shows how official responses, or maybe the perceived lack of real dialogue, just fueled the fire.
So dialogue fails, tensions rise. The sources describe the protests just escalating dramatically from here.
Zhao Ziyang gets back from North Korea April 30th, and the material notes a clash with Li Peng at a standing committee meeting May 1st. Really highlights that core disagreement, order first or political reform.
Then a massive demonstration. About 100,000 students and citizens May 3rd, right before the big May 4th movement anniversary.
And Zhao Ziyang made a really significant move on May 4th, a big departure from the hardline view.
What was it that?
In a speech and later remarks, he praised the student demands as patriotic. Our sources explicitly say this positive view was later counted as a crime against him by the hardliners.
Wow. Then things took an even more serious turn with the hunger strike, starting May 13th.
Yes, students launched it specifically demanding the April 26 editorial be retracted. The sources suggest efforts to end it were tricky. There was apparently a hardline student faction.
And also what was seen as an arrogant attitude from government reps like Yuan Mu in those earlier meetings. Didn't help.
Definitely not. By mid-May, the movement described in the sources really peaked. Numbers in Tiananmen Square swelled to nearly 500,000. Students, workers from all over.
Police control weakened.
Yeah, the square became this unprecedented space for free expression. And the sources also note growing support from overseas Chinese communities during this peak time.
And right in the middle of all this huge escalating protest, Mikhail Gorbachev arrives in Beijing.
Yeah, May 15th. For that historic visit meant to fully normalize Sino-Soviet relations after, decades of pretty cold ties.
The sources indicate the visit, May 15th to 17th, was definitely affected by the protests.
Hugely. Official ceremonies had to be canceled, moved, because Tiananmen Square was occupied.
And the foreign media coverage, according to the material, often linked Gorbachev's reforms back in the USSR to what was happening in China.
Right, and it was actually during his meeting with Gorbachev that Zhao Ziyang made that comment that was later used against him.
Which one was that?
He mentioned that Deng Xiaoping still held the ultimate decision-making power in China. The sources note this was framed as a crime against Zhao by the hardliners.
Okay, so Gorbachev leaves, and the leadership has to confront the situation head-on. This leads to the decision for martial law.
According to the material, there was a crucial meeting. Politburo Standing Committee, party elders at Deng Xiaoping's residence, afternoon of May 17th.
And the sources clearly show that deep split at the top right there. Zhao Ziyang and Hu Qili argued against martial law.
While Li Peng and Yao Yilin strongly supported it, Qiao Shi was apparently neutral.
And Deng Xiaoping's decision at that meeting, The sources detail it, even quote him.
Yeah, he reaffirmed the April 26th editorial was correct, blamed Zhao's May 4th speech for making things worse, and decisively opted for martial law to deploy the military. He's quoted saying something like, "Now if we show signs of retreat, the situation will rapidly deteriorate, control would be lost."
But Zhao Ziyang refused to implement it.
According to the sources, yes. He's quoted saying that as General Secretary, it'd be difficult for me to promote and effectively execute this decision.
So Deng appointed Li Peng, Yang Shangkun, and Cao Shi to enforce it instead.
Even after that massive decision, there were still some, last-ditch efforts at dialogue, and then ultimately Zhao's political end.
Morning of May 18th, the sources describe another government-student meeting. Top officials like Li Peng, Li Taiying, Yan Mingfu, Zhen Jitong meeting student leaders Wang Dan, Wu Kaizi, Chai Ling.
But the material explicitly says this meeting failed. Students wanted real dialogue, retraction of the editorial. Li Peng just focused on ending the hunger strike.
There was a powerful moment from that meeting, though, highlighted here. Student leader Wu Kaizi's televised, really strong criticism of Li Peng went worldwide.
Yeah. Then the next morning, May 19th, the sources describe Zhao Ziyang visiting the hunger strikers in the square, when Jiabao was with him.
He showed sympathy, urged them to end the strike.
Yes, warned about bloodshed, delivered a speech the students welcomed, but the sources note it didn't actually end the hunger strike.
And that evening, an informal meeting led by Deng Xiaoping basically sealed Zhao's fate.
He was formally dismissed June 19th for supporting the turmoil and splitting the party, according to the sources. Remained under house arrest until he died in 2005.
The formal announcement of martial law came May 19th, 10 p.m., at a meeting of officials.
Sources note Zhao wasn't there officially illness. Yang Shangkun gave a speech, and Li Peng argued strongly for martial law's necessity.
So martial law is declared. The sources describe immediate resistance, defiance.
Yes, officially in effect in parts of Beijing, May 20th. Met immediately with huge public opposition. There was a demonstration of 1 million people in Beijing protesting martial law on May 23rd, according to the sources.
And the material notes that through May, Western governments, Japan, France, others were advising their citizens to leave China.
The sources also mention Wan Li, chairman of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. He was out of the country. Xinhua reported May 17th he called the student movement patriotic, promoting reform.
Which the sources say raised hopes among protesters.
But when he came back, he landed in Shanghai, not Beijing, cited illness. The sources say Jiang Zemin persuaded him to back the party center's hardline decision. He later issued a statement supporting it.
A really striking visual symbol mentioned is the Goddess of Democracy statue,
Yeah.
modeled on the Statue of Liberty, put up in the square May 30th by art students.
And support from overseas Chinese communities, Hong Kong, Taiwan, U.S. stayed active right through May and into June, the sources say.
Which brings us to the incredibly difficult and tragic events of June 3rd and 4th. The crackdown itself, as detailed in the source material.
The sources note Western media reporting a big PLA troop buildup in Beijing through June, fueled rumors, anticipation of military action.
Late June 3rd, early morning June 4th, the material describes PLA armored carriers, armed soldiers gathering around Tiananmen Square, moving into the city.
And the sources state clearly, under Premier Li Peng's command, PLA troops and armored vehicles were deployed directly against demonstrators in the square's surrounding areas, night of June 3rd into early June 4th.
Our sources include an account from NHK reporter Ayoshi Kato, who was there June 3rd. He describes seeing unarmed baby soldiers paraded, some reportedly attacked by protesters.
An event, he suggests, interestingly, might have been staged for foreign media. To justify using force later, he also saw groups in white shirts going into the Great Hall of the People.
Kato's account continues, detailing armored vehicles moving into the square 9 p.m. June 3rd, hitting barricades, causing casualties. He saw a woman hit.
Protesters fought back, he says. Molotov cocktails setting vehicles on fire, attacking soldiers escaping the burning vehicles. He even describes horrific things like bodies being burned or hung from a bridge.
The sources give us multiple eyewitness accounts, perspectives on the crackdown, and many of them conflict.
Yeah, this is one of the toughest parts of the material to navigate. Multiple foreign media reports, embassy cables are cited, broadly reporting PLA troops fired indiscriminately on civilians in the streets.
Reportedly under orders to be ruthless.
The sources also relay singer Hao Dejian's account to NHK's Kato. He claimed the military shot worker protesters first, then workers retaliated, attacked, disarmed troops.
And what about protester weapons? The sources seem to differ there too.
They do. Student leader Gao Xin reportedly saw pipes, Molotov cocktails, even a rifle, a machine gun in the square. But another source suggests mostly empty bottles, bamboo sticks.
Hu Dejian and Liu Xiaobo are noted as reportedly destroying seized weapons, saying they weren't needed.
Journalist Nagamochi Hiroki from Asahi Shimbun is cited saying the massacre, the large-scale killing, probably happened in the streets around the square, not mainly in it.
A Chilean diplomat, Carlos Gallo, this is via WikiLeaks, saw troops with batons. No big shooting in the square, but confirmed deaths nearby.
He described seeing helicopters taking away large plastic bags. Thought it was garbage at first, but concluded hundreds were killed elsewhere based on the injured gathering there.
The sources mention that world-famous Tank Man photo. Jeff Widener, AP photographer. June 5th, Chang'an Avenue. Lone guy versus tanks.
It's interesting. NHK reporter Kato offers a specific interpretation of Tank Man according to the sources. He suggests it might have been staged.
Staged? How?
On Chang'an Avenue, where foreign media were. To show tanks wouldn't deliberately run people over, especially after reports or incidents on June 4th where tanks had hit people. He even noted the man's clothes looked like they could be government issue.
Then there's an anonymous source in a 2014 declassified U.S. cable claimed non-Beijing soldiers, 27th Army, led by Yang Shangkun's nephew maybe, fired indiscriminately while laughing.
But the cable author explicitly warns, unconfirmed rumor.
Jay Matthews, Washington Post bureau chief then, is cited believing many journalists weren't in the square. He thinks deaths were mainly on rows leading there, not inside.
He also notes student leader Wu Kaixi claimed 200 students were killed, but that contradicted Wu Kaixi having already left the square earlier.
The sources include that deeply disturbing quote attributed to Deng Xiaoping. 200,000 lives are okay, 1 million is a small number in China.
And another, if Western democracy comes, will cause chaos, hundreds of millions of refugees. These are presented as reflecting the leadership's mindset at the time, according to the material.
Robin Monroe from Asia Watch says he stayed in the square till the end, retreated with students, reported no signs of panic or a massacre in the square itself, focuses on massacres elsewhere.
But then memos from a Japanese defense attaché, Naoki Kasahara, released 2019, paint a vivid picture according to the sources. Bloodshed, soldiers firing on civilians, tanks entering the square firing, clearing students, bloodied women, APCs hitting people, soldiers firing in volleys.
So much conflicting information.
Exactly. The sources state that demonstrators still in the square eventually withdrew early morning June 4th after negotiating with the PLA. Some key student leaders, Wang Dan, Wu Kaixi, Chai Ling, managed to escape China with help.
The material also includes that controversial quote from student leader Chai Ling from a 95 documentary, saying, actually what we were expecting was bloodshed. Only by driving the CCP government into massacring the people could the people wake up.
Though the sources note how Dejian disputes her account of a massacre in the square.
This huge range of conflicting accounts leads right into the casualty figures. The sources present wildly different numbers here.
Yeah, the official Chinese government figure stated here is 319 deaths total. Civilians, military, police.
But the sources immediately give other estimates. Hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands.
Specific numbers mentioned. The Chilean diplomat Gallo saying hundreds killed elsewhere, not in the square. NHK reporter Kato saying several students died in the square, pointing to bullet holes in the monument. Western records cited suggesting over 300 killed outside the square.
There's mention of a 2,600 death figure from the Chinese Red Cross.
Yes, but the sources are careful. They note NYT reporter Nicholas Kristof said this was a rumor about missing students, and the Red Cross later retracted it. So that number is disputed within the sources themselves.
A U.S. Embassy cable, June 4, 89, declassified 99, reported a citizen claiming 10,000 killed in the square. But the cable flags it as an emotional claim, unconfirmed.
Maybe the highest estimate cited comes from that declassified British document, 1989, released 2017. Ambassador Alan Donald estimated at least 10,000 civilians were killed.
Based on info from a state council friend, included horrific details. APCs running over people, bodies bulldozed, burned.
Yes, even injured female students stabbed with bayonets. French sinologist Jean-Pierre Cabestan reportedly notes similar U.S. estimates, supports the British estimates' reliability, though another editor apparently questioned it, saying it was based only on anonymous U.S. info.
Claire Berlinski, using Soviet archives, estimated 3,000 protesters killed, according to the material.
Another U.S. cable, June 22, 89, released 99, reiterated the view, main shooting on roads outside the square. Estimated casualties likely under 3,000, maybe nearer that 2,600 Red Cross figure again, with the caveat about Christoph challenging it.
Then another U.S. cable, March 90, via WikiLeaks. Anonymous source, soldier's mother, claimed the 38th Army killed over 1,000 civilians after soldiers went missing, burned bodies, airlifted them out.
But again, the cable author notes likely exaggerated rumor.
An HK reporter, Cato's overall assessment, as presented here, contrasts the official 319 with rumors up to 1 million. He suggests a 1990 Public Security Ministry report might be closer, 523 total deaths, civilians, military, police, lots of injuries on both sides.
What's so striking is how these sources present such vastly different accounts and numbers, especially on whether a massacre happened inside the square itself versus mainly around it.
You have Yabuki Susumu suggesting misinformation played a role, Juan Restrepo mentioning edited takes.
And accounts from Hao Dejian, Jay Matthews, Robin Monroe saying they saw no massacre in the square, contrasted with general reports of widespread killing and specifics like Kasahara's account or the British ambassadors.
It really highlights, as the sources show, just how hard it is to confirm numbers or even exactly what happened, especially with the censorship that followed.
Moving to the immediate aftermath described in the sources, a swift, comprehensive crackdown on dissent inside China.
Yeah, summer '89 onwards, widespread arrests, protesters, supporters, foreign media kicked out, domestic media heavily censored.
Prominent dissidents had to flee or seek asylum. Fang Lizzi and his wife famously went to the U.S. Embassy, later emigrated. Student leaders like Wang Dan, Moore Keixi, Chai Ling also got out.
The crackdown was all over global TV, BBC, CNN. Seen internationally as indiscriminate firing, a massacre, led to global condemnation, sanctions.
Hong Kong's reaction, the sources say, was incredibly fast and strong. Started June 5th, widespread condemnation, mourning, people pulling money from Chinese banks.
Legislative Council unanimously condemned it. The Hong Kong Alliance formed, still holds vigils. The sources explicitly call this a root cause of Hong Kong's distrust of the CCP, led to emigration.
Taiwan, the ROC, also reacted strongly. Night of June 4th. President Lee Teng-hui condemned it, called for international support, said ROC was severing ties with the CCP, military put on readiness.
On June 7th, the ROC government announced measures to support the movement passports for students, aid, memorials in Taipei, opposition DPP held a hunger strike, Taiwanese singers recorded memorial song.
Western nations, the sources show, strongly condemned the brutal assault, imposed sanctions together, halting high-level visits, freezing loans, formalized at the G7 summit, July '89.
Japan's stance, according to the material, seems a bit more nuanced. Froze OBA June 20th, reviewed loans.
But at the G7, Japan argued against isolating China. PM Uno, Foreign Minister Mitsuzuka supported that.
There's even a letter cited Bush Sr. to Deng Xiaoping, July 21st, mentioning U.S. and Japan worked to soften the G7 declaration's language. U.S. committed to maintaining relations despite Congress pressure.
Other reactions mentioned Singapore PM Lee Kuan Yew expressed shock, sadness.
It's also interesting the sources note many Eastern Bloc countries, nations friendly to China, East Germany, North Korea, Cuba, Pakistan, African nations supported the crackdown or stayed neutral.
Vietnam didn't comment directly, apparently. Philippines expressed regret.
Gradual normalization efforts followed, though. Japan's PM Kaifu mentioned resuming ODA July 90 G7, visited China August 91st, Western leader after the incident.
China requested an Emperor-Empress visit Aug 92, happened Autumn 92. Jiang Zemin visited the U.S. 97. Bill Clinton visited China 98. Sources suggest these signaled broader normalization.
And a small detail from the sources. Potential silent protest by CCTV anchors Su Fei and Dushan. Reportedly wore black, read news slowly June 4th, '89. Dushan later resigned.
Looking long-term now, the sources really emphasize memory, pervasive censorship, and the consistent official stance.
The event became known in China as the Tiananmen Incident from summer '89. Groups formed, like the Tiananmen Mothers, parents of victims, including Ding Zilin.
The sources highlight Liu Xiaobo's case. Writer, activist involved in '89, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize Oct 2010 for nonviolent human rights struggle.
Chinese government pressured embassies not to attend the ceremony. Liu dedicated the award to Tiananmen victims, reportedly. Died in custody in 2017.
But one of the biggest long-term impacts described here is that continued extensive censorship in China, detailed right up to 2024.
Information control massively increased after '89. The Great Firewall uses AI and machine learning to block terms like Oshikudu, June 4th Tiananmen incident, June 4 related images. Searching these is impossible in mainland China, outside HK Macau.
To get around it, sources mention euphemisms emerged, like May 35th, Vivi for 64, 8 squared.
But recent reports, May 2024, cited here suggest younger generations might not even know these euphemisms now because the censorship's been so effective.
Western media blocked when covering it. Foreign photographers stopped from shooting Tiananmen Square around June 4th.
The sources give striking examples. October 2023 photo of athletes with bib number 64 removed, cropped online. Nintendo 64 console renamed iKey player in China.
WeChat transfers of 89.64 yuan blocked June 2018. Influencer Li Jiaqi's stream-cut ice cream shape looked like a tank, apparently reminded people.
Censorship in education too. References removed from Hong Kong textbooks of 2020. CCP official history book, Party History 2021, omits victims, highlights defying sanctions instead.
The effect on younger generations is a key point here. Many who grew up after 8/9 know little about it due to this systematic censorship.
Though some learn studying abroad or get disillusioned by the censorship itself. Sources also mention activists like Xi Jinping, disillusioned, became CCP critics, took Japanese citizenship.
Surveillance is also part of it. Tiananmen Square itself now has facial recognition cameras, sources say. Activists tracked via voice recognition, DNA collection.
The sources explicitly state, the event is one of the CCP's biggest political taboos. No official reflection, apology, verification from the government.
Defense Minister Chi Hoshin even claimed in '96 in the U.S., not one person was killed in Tiananmen Square, drew international opposition.
And the official justification for the crackdown has stayed remarkably consistent, as shown here. June 2019, Defense Minister Wei Fenghe called it correct policy, ensuring stability, development.
Global Times editorial, June 2019, said it gave China immunity against future turmoil. Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang called U.S. criticism nonsense, June 2019, actions completely correct.
More recently, August 2024, Xi Jinping reported praising Deng Xiaoping for handling the turmoil, defending state power, party rule.
It's also worth noting the sources mention external figures defending or praising the actions. Political scientist Zhu Jianrong arguing it was a firing incident, not massacre. Historian Tadayoshi Murata arguing against the massacre in the square idea, criticizing student hunger strike tactics.
Hiroshi Anishi praising Deng's decision as correct, needed for economic growth. Even Gaddafi praised it in 2011, context of Libyan civil war.
Donald Trump reportedly called it a riot in a 2016 CNN town hall, drew criticism from activists.
And finally, the sources note the event gets referenced in other protests globally, like the La Dama incident in Venezuela 2017, compared to Tank Man.
So, having navigated this really complex timeline, this multitude of accounts presented in your sources, what does this deep dive mean for you, the listener, today?
Well, understanding this event, including its tangled origins, the starkly different accounts of the crackdown, and its profound, lasting impact on information control, historical narrative in China. It feels crucial for grasping modern China, its place in the world.
It really forces you to think about state power over information, how history gets written and maintained, and the fundamental challenge highlighted over and over in these sources by the conflicting stories and censorship of just trying to figure out what happened when objective truth is so hard to pin down.
So to wrap up this deep dive, drawing only from your provided sources, we've traced that complex political background, reformers versus conservatives.
Identified the catalyst in Hu Yaobang's death, followed the students' escalating demands, examined that critical leadership split leading Deng and the hardliners to martial law.
Delved into those difficult, often contradictory accounts of the crackdown itself, the disputed casualty figures.
And explored the enduring legacy state censorship, official justification versus the efforts to remember.
We've pulled out a detailed timeline, pinpointed key figures and their actions as described, and presented the multiple perspectives found right here in the material you shared, giving you that foundational understanding built entirely from these sources.
So let's leave you with a final thought, drawn only from the information we've just explored. Given the detailed descriptions in these sources of continued, extensive censorship,
and the dramatically different accounts presented within the sources themselves about what actually happened on June 3rd and 4th.
How does this event serve as a powerful illustration of that fundamental challenge, knowing historical truth, when information is actively controlled, suppressed, and different narratives are rigidly enforced?
What is that contrast between the official story and the various eyewitness accounts presented right here in these sources tell us about navigating information, history, and truth in our own complex digital world today?